Welcome to another episode of The Plunge, and let's start with this episode with some breaking news and give some respect where respect is due. Mike Conley Jr. finally made an All-Star game because Devin Booker is out with a knee injury. I'm so happy. You're probably happy too, Nate.
Yeah, I'm really happy that Conley made it. I mean, you can look at his stats this year and be like, oh, 16-6, who cares? Why didn't you go with a replacement like Fox or SGA? If you guys have forgotten, what did Chris Paul average last year? 16, 6. He was in the MVP conversation last year, and he was with those averages too. And Conley's been great this year. The team has been great when he's on the floor, and I'm just so happy for a guy who just missed a cut in so many years for Memphis.
Yeah, and the more that I think about it, and no disrespect to Conley or anything, the more I think about it, do you think this move by the NBA is more of just a kind of a pity move for Conley? Because clearly, like we were saying, DeRozan could have made it. Booker could have made it when AD was still in the All-Star team. De'Aaron Fox, SGA. Do you think this is more of a pity move by the NBA that just give Conley the an All-Star appearance just to boost his resume, or
I mean,
or does he actually deserve it?
It's partially a pity move because if this was, say he was 24 years old and this was his first kind of crack at the All-Star game, there's no way he would have made it. Without question, he was included at least somewhat because of his years in Memphis, where he was averaging 22 and 7, and he was playing for teams who went to the Western Conference Finals for a bunch of years. And so yes, partially it's a legacy thing, and then also it's kind of the last year where you can really expect to include him because his production this year has been close to All-Star worthy. And so if you get a chance to get a guy in there who's 33, who's having a great year for a team who's number one in the Western Conference, yeah, you take it, just because so many years in the past maybe you screwed up not including him, where the Western Conference was so deep that he didn't get his chance before.
Yeah, I mean, it could also be a pity move for the Utah Jazz just because Mitchell and Gobert were the last two picks on the All-Star draft yesterday. So let's move on to that. I know that we have a lot to say about this, probably some negative things, but basically, yeah, Gobert and Mitchell get picked the last two when clearly the Utah Jazz are the number one team in the league, and whenever LeBron says, "Oh, no slander about the Jazz" or whatever, that means he's probably throwing some shade at them anyway. So, what are your thoughts on Mitchell and Gobert being the last two picks of the All-Star draft?
Gobert, it's very understandable. Rudy Gobert, out of all the guys in the All-Star game, his game probably fits an All-Star format the least. I mean, pretty much everything he does is a pick and roll, and he rolls for the lob, which sure, you could do some of that in the All-Star game, but everyone can catch a lob who's in the All-Star game. And defense, it doesn't really translate to the game. And you're pretty much going up against Embiid and Jokic, who he's had problems with all year long. I mean, Jokic is on his team, on Team LeBron, but you're going up against Embiid late when you care. So Gobert's pretty much rendered useless if you watch that last Philly game versus Utah. Yeah. But the pick of Mitchell as second last, man, that is one of the most disrespectful things I've seen in so long. Like, I don't understand. You have these guys going off about what Devin Booker has done, what Devin Booker can do. Like, whose career do you prefer at this point? Donovan Mitchell or Devin Booker? Like, Booker one time scored 70 against Boston in a loss, and everyone wants to crown him the next great player in the NBA, the next Kobe
Bryant,
pretty much. Yeah. It's ridiculous. Like, sure, he did well in the bubble last year for 8 games. They didn't make the playoffs last year. He hasn't been a winning player before this year when Chris Paul was pretty much the leader of the team. Like, Devin Booker very overrated in my opinion right now, and just really disrespectful to Donovan Mitchell, who shoots threes at a high clip, who has won the dunk contest in the past, who dunks with he dunks with such explosiveness. His game fits so well in an all-star format. He's a guy who's played on Team USA for years, and so that connection, like if you want to claim that, oh, LeBron and KD pick based on who they've played with in the past, or maybe Team USA scrimmage stuff, like Mitchell's been there and he's been a part of that. And I don't know, I just thought he was so disrespectful. Like, you're picking Vucevic over him, you're picking Sabonis over him, like Zach LaVine has one good year and you're picking Zach LaVine over him. Like, there's so many guys who I was like, how have you not picked Donovan Mitchell, the leader of the best team in the Western Conference, who's destroyed your team? If you're LeBron, who's destroyed your team on multiple occasions, you're basically trying to say to him and to that team that your wins in this first half of the season were all luck, or like your team is not going to live up to this because you're saying that his impact on a game isn't that great, and you want to pick him second last in the All-Star game. Like, crazy situation, big disrespect from LeBron, and I really hope to see in the second half a Utah versus the rest of the league kind of mantra throughout their performances, and as they go up against the Lakers, hopefully some more, maybe the Nets some more. I really want to see them play with that chip on their shoulder the rest of the way.
Yeah, I mean, it is literally just straight up disrespect to Mitchell, and it's funny also for the Gobert part. Like, LeBron was like, yo, okay, I think I need some size right now midway through the draft, and he drafts Sabonis over Gobert. Like, come on, Gobert is probably like one of the most finesse centers in the league, and he alters like every shot no matter if he blocks them or not. And he's like, oh, let me just put Domantas Sabonis on my team, who's sure he's a very good player. I would just he could get a triple double, but he's not as good of a rim protector as Rudy Gobert, which I find completely hilarious. And then when you draft it, and the part where you draft players who are on teams who are doing worse than you, like, come on, like you draft Zach LaVine, who's on the Bulls, and you draft Nikola Vucevic, who's on the Magic. The Magic are like, I don't even know, 13th or 14th in the East, right? It's like, come on, you got to give at least some sort of respect to the number one team in the league by not drafting them last, right? You have to, like, there's some sort of like unwritten rule to that, I feel like. But anyways, yeah, that's the way it is.
Yeah,
Quince. Yeah,
sorry, I cut you off there. But one interesting point that I kind of thought was underrated throughout this process, there was another duo in the All-Star game. I mean, the Brooklyn Nets kind of had three players in James Harden and Kyrie, but another duo in the All-Star game was Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum, and they both went above Gobert and Mitchell. Who would you rather have as a duo this year? Like, how disrespectful to a team who is the top of the Western Conference, who's beaten big teams all year, and you're going to pick the 500 Boston Celtics duo way above them in the draft.
Yeah, I mean, like, I didn't even think Jason Tatum should have made the All-Star team this year, just because he was out with COVID. And even like his past few games before the All-Star break, he wasn't even scoring that much. Like I think his field goal percentage is pretty bad, judging by the way he has been shooting the ball. But yeah, I agree. And I guess one last thing, Quinn Snyder, you better play LeBron 48 minutes during the All-Star game. I don't care what the score is, but you better like tire this man out as much as you can, because you know you'll be facing the Lakers later in the playoffs. And you need to get as much mileage on LeBron James as possible in this All-Star game because you have control. But yeah, so I guess looking forward to the actual All-Star game itself. Which team do you think will come out on top? I think it's pretty obvious, because LeBron's team, I think is way more stacked than Durant's, because you look at his team, he's got Giannis, Kyrie, Steph. Oh wait, hold on, sorry, I'm reading the wrong list. But I think he had Steph and Dame on the same team with like Giannis, And
yeah, I think his starting
yeah,
lineup is him, Giannis, Steph, Luka, Jokic.
yeah, yeah, something like that, which is like way more stacked than Durant's team. Um, but yeah, I don't know. I'm looking forward to this game. I feel like once the guys get into actually playing the game itself, it'll get competitive like last year, and I think it will somehow result in the same similar ending where it's close and it gets competitive and all. And so, yeah. Anything else you're looking forward to this All-Star game?
Yeah, well, I also agree with you from the standpoint of LeBron's team is much better. Like that starting lineup has probably 5 of the top 8 players or something like that. I mean, KD's a little bit handicapped because he has to take Kyrie with the first pick, and Kyrie is not in an intense game like the All-Star game was last year. Kyrie is not as great as some of the other players. Like I would take Luka over Kyrie in a situation like that. Or I mean, Kawhi's a good player on KD's team as well, of course. But I definitely think LeBron won out in that All-Star draft because Dame first in the reserves round and everything. But one story to watch, I mean it's not such a big deal throughout this All-Star experience, but I think last year when you saw the closing lineups for the All-Star game when they were really getting down to business, Chris Paul was on that starting lineup, and I'll be interested to see who Chris Paul subs in for late in the game for Team LeBron, whether that be they run a small ball unit and play Jokic instead. But I would be interested to see if they actually sub out Luka late in that game. Even though I think Luka is he's one of the most clutch players in the NBA right now. But watch out for who subs in for who in that end of the game, and expect to see Embiid put a lot of work in late too in the post like he did last year.
Yeah. Okay. I think LeBron's team to close the game. Okay, you have LeBron obviously, and then you mentioned CP3. I think you have to have Dame in there for sure, as your 2 guards. So, but that leaves Steph on the bench. But I don't know if you run a small ball lineup like you said. Maybe you could put Paul George, but I don't know.
Yeah,
I think. Yeah, I don't know. It's tough.
It'll be interesting to see because as good of a shooter as Steph is, and I'm a huge Steph fan, he's not really the most clutch player. Like, over his career, you would rather him take a shot in the third quarter than the fourth quarter. It's more likely to go in the third quarter, whereas Dame, it's more likely to go in the fourth quarter than the third quarter, and we've seen that time and time again this year. Steph's a better player. Dame's a more clutch player. We'll see how it plays out. I expect to see Curry in that finishing lineup. Maybe CP3 doesn't play at the end, but I think that's kind of more of an interesting. It's more interesting because of how last year played out, who Team LeBron or Quinn Snyder puts in at the end of that game, just because it does have so much on the line. You know, like players, you're basically trying to form the single best lineup you can for those last, 20 points of the game for the Elam ending. And it's not how it used to be where starters just close the game because they're trying to go with their best lineup. So it'll be interesting to see what they perceive to be the best lineup in that they can make out of that team because there's so much talent there.
Chris Paul might not close just because he's a bit older, and they have been managing his minutes with the Suns lately. Even Dame, he withdrew from the 3-point contest for rest reasons, so I don't think you will see too much of him in the All-Star game, actually, just because he's been carrying the Blazers. I guess one thing about the Dame and Steph clutch thing, like, it's funny, I was watching the Kings against the Blazers yesterday, and it was actually a tight game throughout the entire game, but, like, I was just not nervous at all through the entirety of the game. Even when they were down 5 with about 4 minutes to go, like, I just knew Dame would just somehow show up in some way, and he did. He scored like 10 points in the last 2 minutes of the game. Like, come on. And it'll be a very fun All-Star game. I think, like I said, the guys will get into it once the game goes on.
It's
Um,
funny to watch Dame this year. Like it's a cross sport reference, but he kind of gives that sense of security late in games that Russell Wilson used to give as a Seahawk, where
yeah,
it's like, oh sure, you're down 3 with 5 minutes remaining. Like the Seahawks have this one locked up because almost every time down the field, Russell Wilson would find a way to get into the end zone at the end of the game. And it's kind of funny to make that comparison between Dame and Russell Wilson from not this past year, but pretty much every year before that, where it's just like, yeah, I got this. Like, I don't care what situation we're in. It's going to happen for this team, and that's why the Blazers have been so consistent throughout this year too.
yeah, and I've watched Dame play this entire season, and it's so fun to watch him play because I like to copy all his moves, and I think one move that stands out to me is kind of his step back. It's not really the dribble cross, like triple crossover that Steph does to get into a step back shot. It's just a 1 pound, like a one hard pound dribble with the left hand and then step back, and with like a right foot jab step to the left. And I think that move is such a strong move and even underrated move, just because like all these kids these days are just trying to copy Steph and all the dribble combos you can make to before you get off a shot. But like Dame's method of getting that foot and kind of pushing that momentum to the hoop and then stepping back, I think that's a great move. Like he used that against the Warriors a couple games back, which was a horrible decision by the Warriors by only just guarding him one-on-one. Like they've been doubling him that entire game, and then that last possession there, they just guard him one-on-one, I think with Kent Bazemore, and just Dame just sinks a 3 from like 30 feet, right? So I think he's been the sole reason that the Blazers have been doing so well. Let's move on to kind of the midseason point of the NBA and just kind of give out some awards for the All-Star break. So, Nate, let's just start with MVP. Who do you have for the MVP from this half of the season?
The MVP for this half of the season it's really one of the situations where it's been so crowded the last couple of years, and then this year it's just really clear to me. I mean, you can bring up Jokic and what he's done, but the team record just isn't there. But after 2 nights ago, when Philadelphia played Utah, I think you have to go with Embiid. I mean, he had 40 and 19 in that game against Rudy Gobert, who is one of the elite defenders in the league. I mean, I'll get to him later, but it's been a year where Embiid has heard time and time again about what he can't do and what he's not doing, and he's finally addressed all those issues. Like time and time again, you hear about your 7'2", 280-pound center with all the skills in the world. Why are you not backing down in the post? Why are you continuing to chuck 10 threes a game at a 30% clip? And just everything about his game this year has opened up so much because he's not forcing things, because he knows where he can efficiently get a bucket, and that's down low against defenders who just don't have an answer for a guy with his body style. And he's been shooting elite from the mid-range. He's been shooting well from the 3. His team has been so much better when he's on. His defense is really underrated, I would say, by some people who kind of look at him as just an offensive player. But his defense is elite, and he's just done everything right for a team that's at the top of the East so far this year.
Yeah, and I think this year has really been the year where kind of Embiid kind of imposes just his physicality aspect of his game, because guys leave the paint so open. They give up so much space for him to just chuck up these practice mid-range shots from the free throw line, and the amount of times he's able to get those shots off with like very minimal like a contention on those shots is insane. And I think Embiid's the clear-cut player to me. And I don't know, what is your case for Embiid over a guy like LeBron, who's been kind of carrying the Lakers, but they have had a couple strings of losing streaks, and he's without AD, and of course the national media will cover him. So what is your argument kind of against LeBron here?
Yeah, well, it's interesting when you look at this statistical profile of LeBron. I mean, stats aren't everything, don't get me wrong, because LeBron affects the game in more ways than stats can count. But he's like, I think his highest single category where he's ranking is points. He's averaging like 25.5 or something like that. He's 12th in the league. That's his highest ranking through any category in the league. He's not leading in assists this year like he was last year. His boards they're around like I think he's averaging like 25 and a half, 8 and 8 or something around that range with a PER in like the mid-teens. He has been good. He has at times willed them to victories, but they're also not a great team with AD out. Like you can see they go into these big games against teams who are playoff teams and they can't seem to find a win without AD in there. And that's where it becomes, yeah, sure, LeBron's been great and he's done all these things to keep them beating bad teams and keep them in that third spot now. I think Phoenix jumped over them after their game, but he's been doing all this stuff to keep them in that top tier in the Western Conference, but he hasn't done enough to put him over a guy like Embiid. And I don't even think it's a better year for him than last year so far this year. So you could maybe pass the narrative off to, oh, he didn't win it last year, so he should take it home this year because a lot of people think he deserved it last year. But he hasn't been as good this year as he was last year.
Yeah, and I was actually listening to a Bill Simmons pod episode, and they're talking about how the media is like, oh, why hasn't LeBron won more MVPs than he has in his career? And then they literally go back the past like 10 years and talk about like the MVP winners on those years and just saying how those players were way better than LeBron on those specific years. Like you had Steph Curry, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Kevin Durant, and then that Derrick Rose year, right? So I think, yeah, I think the narrative around LeBron is like, oh, it's time for him to win another MVP. And that, of course, that's pretty biased, right? And so I really think Joel Embiid should win this year, given the way that the Sixers are playing, because they are playing really good basketball over teams like the Nuggets who have Jokic and even the Blazers who have Lillard, the Mavs with Luka, right? And so what do you think Embiid will sustain this level of MVP level talent, or do you think another candidate such as Jokic, Lillard, Doncic could even just kind of gain some steam in the second half of the season? Like, do you think those guys have a chance?
I think the most likely guys to really step into that conversation are Jokic and Doncic, just because their statistical profiles are already so good. Like, Jokic has one of the highest PERs of all time. He's been really good for Denver. He's done everything they need. He can score at will when they need a bucket. But for the thing really holding Doncic and Jokic back this year is definitely record. Like, when you're hovering around that 500 mark, no one really wants to reward your team. So if Denver hops up to a 3 seed, if Dallas hops up to a 4 seed, then your conversation becomes more interesting because Philly has a better supporting cast around Embiid than the Mavs do around Doncic. And you could say the same maybe for the Nuggets. They have a talented supporting cast, but it's a little bit lacking in some areas, whereas Philly has a roster that's really well built from Daryl Morey putting together the pieces they need in this past offseason and Doc Rivers coming in to coach. So I think the most likely candidate is Luka hopping in that second half if the Mavs can keep climbing the standings, or Jokic. He should finish top 3. I'll put it that way, but we'll see if he gets any higher than that.
Yeah, I think one factor that is pretty important is how kind of the head-to-head matchups during the season. Like, I remember like when Lillard was actually in the top 3 in the MVP conversation like 2 weeks ago, and then the Blazers go on a road trip and they play Denver, who has Jokic, LA, who has LeBron, Washington, who has Bradley Beal, and they lose all of their games to those teams, and that kind of sinks his placing in the MVP rankings, and now I don't think he's going to win MVP, right? So I think these head-to-head matchups between these MVP candidates says a lot, right? And like you said, with the Sixers beating the Jazz the other day, that speaks a lot to Embiid, and I think he scored 44 points or something in that overtime win, right? And so that
that
really
three to send it to overtime as well.
The double pump fake.
Yeah.
Was that over Joe Ingles? Or Bogdanovich? It was either Ingles or Bogdanovich.
Yeah, you can't tell the two apart sometimes.
I don't think it wouldn't be Ingles. Ingles would not let that go.
No, of course not.
I think Embiid's probably in the best position to win MVP. So let's move on. Defensive Player of the Year. I think it's pretty clear cut. In my opinion, it's probably Gobert. What do you think?
Yeah, I would go with Gobert as well. I mean, the one case against him now is being exposed by Embiid the other day.
Yeah,
and
true.
So maybe that destroys his case some, but they're not going to play Philly again this year, I don't think. So you're kind of like, okay, if we can get past this and we have another 40 games and the Jazz keep performing so well, Gobert's a clear choice here. I mean, there's not much conversation. Otherwise, obviously, Giannis isn't going to get it again just because he hasn't been as elite this year on defense, and they don't like to reward it 2 years in a row. So your real top three is like probably Embiid. Maybe you put who's your best perimeter defender this year?
It's tough to say because Smart has been out.
Yeah.
You could say Kawhi, because he's consistent, but he hasn't been even getting that much attention this year.
Yeah, for sure. I can't really identify an elite perimeter defender throughout this year. Like
Lou
I
Dort.
know
Lou Dort.
Yeah, Lou
There you
Dort.
go. There you go.
He doesn't quite get the national attention though.
No.
So it's probably between Gobert and Embiid at this point. One guy who doesn't really have a case for it, but also I think is very impactful in not exactly traditional defensive ways. He's a good traditional defender, but Chris Paul in terms of team defense, I think that's an interesting kind of standpoint to look at because the Suns have been elite defensively this year. And you can pin that to Mikal Bridges is a really good wing defender. DeAndre Ayton is a pretty good interior defender. Jay Crowder, another good perimeter defender. But Chris Paul is really the guy who puts people in their positions. He plays tough defense up top. And he's really made that Phoenix team a top defensive team in the league too.
Yeah, he's been a good leader for that team. And it also helps when you have guys like Bridges, Crowder, even Cam Johnson, who are above average defenders, right? So let's move on to sixth man of the year. I'm not sure if we have really a good idea of who would be sixth man, but here's a list I just found on Google. So I have Jordan Clarkson, Eric Gordon, Chris Boucher, Terrence Ross, Montrezl Harrell. Like, I think those are the guys that kind of stick out the most. There really isn't like a super kind of Lou Williams like superstar sixth man. You could argue for Jordan Clarkson, but I don't know. Who's your pick for sixth man so far?
I like Jordan Clarkson. I think he'd probably get it because you kind of have to reward Utah in some type of accolade. And if you do decide Gobert for defensive player of the year, maybe Jordan Clarkson doesn't get sixth man of the year. And maybe it goes to, I would say Montrezl Harrell would probably be second in that running. Even though I think Terrence Ross has been pretty good this year. Like, he's probably averaging close to 20, 21 points a game. And that just won't really go noticed for a team who's losing. It's probably the award that's most likely to go to a guy who's coming off the bench first for a top 3 seed in either conference. And so, yeah, Jordan Clarkson, probably the choice right now. Montrezl Harrell watch out for though, just given how long AD might be out and how he kind of learns to mesh with that Lakers team.
Yeah. So let's go to most improved. I think this is a very fun kind of award that they give out because there's just a lot of players that actually improved a lot this season. So you got Jeremy Grant, I think he's probably one of the front runners. Even Julius Randle, right? He had quite a few triple doubles. He's carrying the Knicks team. Colin Sexton, maybe Christian Wood once he gets back, if he kind of goes on a super good tear in the second half of the season. So who's probably the most that sticks out to you that's most likely to win?
Yeah, I guess this is one of those awards where it's kind of like if you're a second-year player, you can't win it, it's interesting to me. Like Luka last year, he went from 21 5-5 to 30 10-10, and he didn't win it. But like a guy like Zion, you could look at him and be like, okay, he's pretty much improved his game all around. He's not as much of a defensive liability as he was before. But I would give this award to Jeremy Grant just based on the fact that for so many years he's been relegated to that not even the sidekick role, like the fourth or fifth man on a team. And finally, he bets on himself and goes to a place like Detroit where he'll have so many opportunities, and he shows clear improvement. And the only guy who I would have looked at the start of the season without question and said, this guy should be above Jeremy Grant would be Christian Wood, just because, sure, he kind of made that jump last year around the trade deadline, and people just didn't really bother to notice. But he was going off for the Rockets at the start of the year, and he had them with a winning record when he left, either 500 or a winning record. And just to look at the train wreck they've been since. So he is a guy I would like it to be awarded to, but it probably goes to Jeremy Grant, unless Grant misses time this year. Otherwise, the determining factor between the two would be that 15 games that Christian Wood is probably going to miss.
There are rumors that Jeremy Grant or the Celtics are interested in taking Grant or trading for him, but that'll of course affect his positioning for sixth or for most improved. But I think I'm going to pick Julius Randle just because I'm looking at his numbers right now. Like last year, he averaged 19.5 points per game. It's up to 22.4. 9.7 rebounds last year, up to 11. 3 assists last year, up to 6, which is actually a pretty significant stat given the way that he plays and distributes the ball. And he's been shooting 38% from 3 compared to 27% from last year. And I'm kind of looking at this in terms of the level of opportunity when it comes to Jeremy Grant on the Pistons, who have nobody, and then Julius Randle, who actually has a decent team around him with RJ Barrett and now Derrick Rose, who's like a bucket getter, right? And so you have all these guys who is capable of scoring, but then Julius Randle has elevated his game even more. He's improved all of his statistical categories astronomically this year. And so I think, and even team success, the Knicks are actually over 500 for once after the All-Star break. So I think I'm going to take Julius Randle for most improved this year.
There's a couple other guys who are kind of, I was just thinking about this award more. There's a couple of other guys who are kind of sneaky gets for this year, like Zach LaVine. He's got a possibility of taking it home. But the one guy who I think it might not be significant enough of a jump. I think he actually already won one. CJ McCollum, if he hadn't missed time this year, he probably would have been in the running because, yeah, sure, he only bumped from 22 to 26, but he was like a different player this year. Like
he would have made the All-Star game for sure.
Yeah, without
no
question.
Doubt.
I mean, now Mike Conley's in it, so without question, he would have been in it. But he made a really big jump this year, and I still think they should split it up just because there's a lot of redundancy in their skill sets, and they still do well with only Dame there and CJ out.
Yeah.
But CJ, his value at the end of last year was probably not that high. Like, you'd get a borderline all-star for him. And then this year, after the first 2 weeks, you're like, okay, like, you're looking at maybe a borderline all-star and some picks with how he was playing. Like, one more addition, Mikal Bridges maybe is someone you look at
Possibly.
as well.
Yep. The thing about CJ, like, I think now looking forward, once he comes back, he has to average around 27, 28 a game, and he has to rocket the Blazers up to like the third or fourth seed in the Western Conference, which I don't think that's possible. The thing of him averaging 20 points per game is feasible, more feasible than them making the third or fourth seed. But then again, he did win Most Improved one year, I remember, and so I don't think he'll win. But it is a very interesting pick, and also a pick that we should highlight, or even a player that we should highlight who would have made the All-Star game this season for sure. So let's just get these last two ones quickly out of the way because they're probably more obvious than the other ones. So Rookie of the Year, pretty obvious, LaMelo Ball. Maybe Halliburton, but probably LaMelo Ball, right?
Yeah, without question. I mean, LaMelo is just showtime, right? Halliburton, I'll talk about time and time again as he is an ideal player. That's what people want to draft, but LaMelo Ball has been above and beyond what you would expect of him, and he's just such an effortless player out there. Like he just does everything so well and knows the game well, and yeah, without question, he'll probably win it unanimously.
Yeah. And then Coach of the Year,
Quinn Snyder.
Yeah,
I mean,
no doubt.
I think out of those three categories, Defensive Player of the Year, Sixth Man, and Coach of the Year, they don't win one of those. We'll see who it is. I think most likely right now it would be Gobert not winning Defensive Player of the Year, but maybe Clarkson doesn't win Sixth Man. But if Utah is number one, without question, Coach of the Year is Quinn Snyder, with Thibodeau as he's probably the runner-up.
Yeah, I could see that. But if the Jazz finish first overall in the league, they have to win at least two out of those three awards. One for sure. It has to be one. Coach of the Year is a given if they finish first, right? But if their defensive rating remains in the top 5 in the NBA, you have to give Gobert Defensive Player of the Year for sure. And then when you look at their offense, right, you got to that'll determine Jordan Clarkson's likeliness of winning Sixth Man of the Year. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I mean, man, it's one of those situations where it's starting to feel like it's a league against Utah, and I think that's a storyline to watch out for in the second half as they kind of maybe go on their revenge tour. And I'm excited to watch it because I love the Jazz this year, and I feel like they've been really disrespected. So
yeah. So what's the one thing that you're looking forward to most in the second half of the season? It could be a team, could be a player, could be some sort of rankings in the standings, playoff seedings. What do you think stands out the most to you that you'll pay most attention to this year or for the rest of the season?
I think I'll pay the most attention to the 4 through 8 in the Western Conference, just because I think it's such an interesting grouping of teams right now. 4 through 8, I think you have the Clippers, who have really not looked great lately. At 5, you have
the Blazers, and then Nuggets, Spurs, Mavericks.
Nuggets, Spurs, and Mavericks.
Yeah.
I really think the Spurs will probably fall off at some point, although it hasn't happened yet. But that grouping, I mean, you can throw the 9 seed in there because that's a Warriors, and they're like 0.1 percentage point behind the Mavericks, and like I think they have the same amount of losses or something like that. But it will be such an interesting grouping to watch because there seems like there's 6 playoff teams out of that group right now, and it'll be interesting to see which one fails to make it or how that play-in tournament goes. The West play-in tournament is going to be a dogfight. Like, you're looking at Warriors against I don't know, like the Mavericks
Pelicans?
or the Blazers. Oh yeah, Pelicans are the 10 seed. Like, even that, I think like you're just gonna have such strong matchups within that for a one game play in. Like it's just gonna be a dogfight, and they're going to really you're going to miss out on one potential playoff team and one team who should be in the playoffs most years. And that's going to be so fun to watch between those teams playing for their playoff lives.
I would say that right now the standings are a little bit weird just because of all the postponements due to COVID, that some teams have played way less games than other teams. Like the Blazers have the same amount of losses as the Clippers. They both have 14 losses, which is so weird. But the Clippers are 24-14. The Blazers 21-14. And then Memphis has barely played any games. They're 16-16, right? And they are 10th right now, which qualifies them for the play-in seed. So yeah, I agree. I think that's going to be a very interesting storyline, just because the East is just so depleted and kind of even boring to watch, seeing guys like Tatum and like all-star players who are struggling, and even their teams are struggling, right? Indiana has actually been pretty bad the past few games. I think they're under 500. Yeah, they're 16-19 after starting 3-0 this season. But yeah, I agree. The West will be very tight. But right now, like 1 through 9, I think that looks pretty realistic in terms of kind of the final 8 teams that make the playoffs. Like you have on the bottom area of the 8th seed, you have the Mavericks, Warriors hovering there. I don't think the Pelicans will really get it together in time, although they have given the ball to Zion a lot more. Do you think they'll make the playoffs, the Pelicans, given that their changes so far?
No, I mean, even after their changes, like they had that big win streak where they were close to 500 again, and then they kind of tailed off. And so it's one of those things where you have so many inconsistencies with a young team like that who is trying to figure out if their identity is give the ball to Ingram on the perimeter or Zion inside. And it's one of those situations where it maybe in the future, like maybe next year, they're a playoff team. Not this year though.
Yeah. But yeah, looking at the seeding, it's really a bit messed up. But I guess the one thing that I'll pay attention to is obviously the Blazers, just because they're 21-14. They're 7 games over 500 without CJ and Yusuf Nurkic. And sure, I think not much will change once they're back, but given that they are 7 games over 500, and when they're back, there has to be at least some level of improvement for that team, and that may translate them to moving a little bit, maintaining that 5th seed in the West. Just because you have the Nuggets and Mavericks who are going to be on your heels for the rest of the way this season for that 5th seed, because I think you really have to kind of stay out of the 6th and 7th seed, in my opinion. Because if you're the 6th seed, you either play the Jazz, Lakers, or Clippers, right? And then if you're in the 7th seed, you're going to be in that play-in tournament. So, yeah, I think the 5th seed is going to be a very interesting spot for the West right now.
Yeah, it's definitely going to come down to like, well, you probably play the Suns. That would be my guess. The 4-5 matchup will probably include the Suns. That would be my guess at this point.
What scares me, though, is that the Lakers could finish 4th. And whoever's in that 5th seed is maybe screwed for the playoffs, right?
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, it'll definitely be something that kind of may come back to haunt some teams that AD missed games, because it's not going to haunt the Lakers if AD comes back healthy, but the 6th seed or someone who played hard all season gets the Lakers the first round, and that's just a nightmare. One other storyline I wanted to mention, the Wizards, we talked about them last week. They keep rising. I mean, they beat the Clippers last night, and I expect them to probably be a playoff team still. Like, you can just see how that team is supposed to function now, and it functions in a way that probably wins 7 out of 10 games in most 10-game stretches, just because the dynamic scoring of Beal and then Westbrook playing at a normal Westbrook level again.
Yeah, and you have a lot of teams that ahead of them that will drop, like the Bulls, the Hawks, the Hornets, maybe the Knicks. I don't know. But yeah, for sure, the Washington Wizards do have a clear-cut chance to make the playoff for sure, or the play-in for sure, into the 8th seed. But it is a bit far-fetched. But given that the way they've been playing, really, I think health is probably the biggest factor into all of this, because Westbrook has been playing back-to-backs already, again this season when he has been sitting them earlier this season, and just the load that Beal has to carry. It'll be an interesting storyline, but yeah, for sure. But even then, let's be real, the West is way more interesting to watch than the East right now.
That's true. But I think Washington could give a headache to a team like the Bucks in the first round, or even the Nets. Like, man, I would like to see that series if they play the Nets in the first round.
Russ and KD, hey?
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, Washington's won both of the games in that series so far. So that would be kind of a fun storyline to watch.
And even the Miami Heat, who are in the 6th seed right now, and they could stay around the 5 to 8 seed. Whoever plays them in the playoffs, whoever's 1 to 4, has to be scared of the Heat. So
no kidding.
It's those. Yeah, I think this year the bottom seedings, like 4 to, like being in 5 to 8, you kind of have to be a threat to the 1 to 4 seed in the Eastern Conference this year.
Yeah, it would be interesting to watch how these bottom but really talented teams match up against some of the teams who have played well throughout the regular season.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess that does it for this week's episode of The Plunge. NBA All-Star break is upon us. It'll be sad that there's no basketball for another 7 days, but we'll get through it. But yeah, until next time, we'll see you in the next episode.